Welcome everyone. This presentation is about to begin. This session will be recorded and will last 60 minutes. Please keep your mic muted during the presentation and turn off web cameras. If you have a question or comment, enter it in the chat during the presentation and the presenter will address your question at the end. If you are on the phone, you will be given an opportunity during the question and answer time to voice your questions and or comments. All participants in today's event will have access to the recorded version, which will be available within 2 business days after the live event. TESOL International Association's Adult Education Intersection is pleased to present this webinar titled Pronouns, Normalizing the Teaching of They, Them, Their, Singular. Our speaker is Elizabeth Freeman from Highline College in Des Moines, Washington. We are very pleased to welcome all of you to this webinar. My name is Alexander Tang, and I will be your moderator for today's event. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Elizabeth Freeman.
Thank you. Thanks, Alex. Or do you prefer Alexander?
Oh, Alex is fine.
Okay, awesome. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you again for your patience. Because we are running a little late, I'm going to jump right into it. And my goal for today is to leave plenty of time for questions, because I find that every time I'm in a room with other educators or other people in leadership or just people, they come with great questions, and there are many obstacles with teaching this. So I would love to hear from y'all. Like Alex said, my name is Elizabeth. I have a very long name, Kara Elizabeth Paget Freeman, but please call me Elizabeth. And my pronouns are she, they. From where I am right now, I'm in Seattle, Washington, and the land acknowledgement is that this is being presented on the indigenous lands of the Duwamish, Puyallup, Muckleshoot, and Salish tribes who cared for this land in the past and the present. So maybe treat it with respect and love. And I always love to give a disclaimer. I accidentally became passionate about this subject. I am still very much learning. I'm certainly not a gender studies expert. And though the gender neutral pronoun is being projected to increase and stay in our English language, many facets within the subject are still being updated and discovered. So the learning never stops, because the world is always changing, which is why I'm excited to hear what you all think and what you all have heard. So let's start with the why. Why is this important? The why is quite big, but let's start with as official as it can get. Because English doesn't have this official academic institution that monitors the language, we do have a couple things that guide us, and one of which is the dictionary. And in 2019, Merriam-Webster added they as a pronoun to a single person whose gender identity is non-binary. And I have this little highlighted asterisk because that already, since 2019, is needing an update, because it's not just non-binary individuals that use the they singular pronoun. And then in 2017, the Associated Press Stylebook added they as a gender neutral pronoun. So these are 2 institutions and guidebooks for how people write and how people refer to the English language, and they updated the they gender neutral pronoun quite a few years ago. Also, many languages have adapted their language just in the previous decade to include a gender neutral pronoun. I believe it was in 2015, Sweden, for Swedish, they added hen as a gender neutral pronoun, and just a little bit after, Germany and the German language added they as a gender neutral pronoun. So other languages are quickly adding gender neutral pronouns as well. And I like to show 2 different surveys from Pew Research Center. And Pew Research Center is a US-based research center, and they consider themselves to be non-bipartisan, or they consider themselves to be bipartisan, and they do a lot of social research. And the one in 2018 found that 1 in 5 adults knew a lot about gender neutral pronouns, and as well, 18% 18%, 1 in 5, however is easier for you to remember, they've heard about gender neutral pronouns. And when you look at the percentage of US adults saying that they would be comfortable using the gender neutral pronoun, we had about 52% saying they were comfortable using it, and overall the net of 47 saying they were uncomfortable. But you can see there's a lot of people on this graph on the right-hand side that are in the somewhat category. And I believe the somewhat, in order for them to be swayed in more of the very column, it just requires exposure. That's my personal opinion, though. And you can especially see the age breakdown, and the younger generation, 18 to 29, tends to be a little bit more comfortable. What I would love to see more in this research study is from high schoolers and from children, because they are, of course, our future. And so I'm quite curious to see from that, but due to many reasons, they could not include children in the study. Now, the reason why I wanted to show you the first research that was done in 2018 is to show you the 32% increase from 2018 to 2021. So in 2018, as you saw, it was 1 in 5 individuals, and now it is 1 in 4. So that is a huge jump in a short amount of time. And again, this is the percentage of adults who say they personally know someone who uses pronouns, gender neutral pronouns, or the they, them, their pronoun. And the biggest bump, just like in the previous slide, let me find my little laser pointer. There it is in the 18 to 29 category. And then second to that is the 30 to 49 age bracket. And again, I wish we could see middle school or high school ages, because from what I have talked with colleagues who have children, it seems it's quite common now in high school and middle school, at least in the Seattle area, that many individuals who are younger and under 18 know and are very comfortable using the gender neutral pronoun. So who are the individuals using these pronouns? And we have non-binary, agender, gender fluid, genderqueer, demisexual, trans men and women who are in the process of transitioning, intersex individuals, and others. It's not just confined to non-binary individuals, though non-binary individuals are the largest demographic that use this. And non-binary, for those who don't know, it simply means they are in the middle. They do not feel they are male or female, but in the middle. And why am I showing you all of these famous individuals? The reason why is because all of these individuals are people who use the gender neutral they, them, their pronoun. And what is so beautiful to me is the diversity of physical characteristics. So my false assumption going into this, say 2, 3, 4 years ago, was that those who use the gender neutral pronoun look androgynous, and that is totally false. Again, the physical spectrum of those who use it is quite broad, and this is why it is important to normalize asking about pronouns, because some of these individuals you may refer to as she or he because they dress and style themselves along with the gender they were assigned at birth. So we never know. Physical characteristics, how people express themselves, is not always aligned with their gender identity. And I prefer to give you all about 30 seconds to a minute to read by yourself some of this vocabulary. And if anyone is not able to read this vocabulary, I am also happy to read it. I just wanted to give everyone a little bit of a pause. But if you are not able to read the vocabulary, please raise your hand. I will read it for you. And again, I just want to remind you all that this topic is still being developed, and the term gender nonconforming, this is what I have found to be the best definition for it, but I have also had other individuals tell me that it's not necessarily the broad umbrella term. So a lot of these definitions are still being defined, so to say. Okay, so what I want to address are three main obstacles that I have heard from other instructors, teachers, grammarians in teaching the gender neutral they, them, their pronoun, because that is why we're all here. We want to know why we should teach it, and of course, we want to know how. So I'm going to address three common obstacles that I've heard from fellow colleagues. The first is from English teachers who teach lower level students. Now, lower level to me, I'm referring to those who are in the beginning stages of their English learning journey. They're students who maybe they know simple grammar, maybe they don't, but they're students that are learning about pronouns for the first time, or they're still needing to review pronouns. That's what lower level means to me. So, obstacle. It will be too confusing for lower level students. Now, I always believe it will be more confusing to unlearn it later. So pronouns, in my understanding, is something you learn very early into your English learning journey. And it's going to be harder to learn a new pronoun later. It's going to be even harder if it changes your understanding of pronouns. Just as we teach the you, singular and plural, we can also teach the they, singular and plural. It's another thing to remember that many of our students, it doesn't matter what level English they are in or where they are in their English language journey, they may come in contact with individuals who do not use the he or she pronoun. So it's our job and our honor to do our best to give them important foundational language blocks. Another thing that I think about is even with the confusion and the learning curves, it helps us combat the language asymmetry in English. And if you have any questions about what I mean with language asymmetry, please pocket that, and I'm happy to explain more or hear your input with language asymmetry later on. Another obstacle that I hear is, but my students are used to two genders. Now, this is overwhelmingly likely, right? Most of us, most cultures, most individuals come from places where there is a binary, where there is male and female and nothing between. This is still true, but not all cultures view gender as male or female. Many cultures, especially coming from Western or Nordic Europe, they now normalize multiple genders. Another thing that I've found is not all cultures mark gender at birth. So sometimes it's not even about the gender binary, it's when they mark gender. And I don't know if we have any instructors who have experience teaching high school or middle school or even younger. But that's another thing to remember if you teach or if you tutor anyone under 18 years old, is not all cultures mark gender at birth. And I actually will have a few examples later on in the presentation. And if we're just focusing on the language, not even on the culture, not all languages are gendered. So if a student is coming from a language that is not gendered, then the gender neutral pronoun will make sense to them. Now, examples include Chinese, Estonian, and Finnish. And when I'm talking about gendered languages, I'm saying no pronoun is gendered, no noun, no adjective, and then the number increases up to 57 languages have no gendered pronouns. So, something to think about. The third obstacle and the third thing I hear from fellow colleagues is I don't have any of those students in my class. So we're always trying to do our best to teach for our environment, for our audience. And so many instructors feel that well, I don't have any of those individuals in my class, so I don't need to teach the gender binary. And first of all, we should teach them how to interact with the world, not just themselves. And of course, how do you know? um, the reason that what sparked my passion in this subject was a student coming to me in 2019 asking to be referred to by their name because they were not on the gender binary and they didn't know a gender neutral pronoun existed in English. And they had the bravery and the courage to come up to me and say, hey, don't call me she, call me by my name. And so, of course, I did. And that was in late 2019. And I had them as a student in 2020. And then COVID happened. So I had a lot of time to think about this. And again, like I just said, even if you don't technically have any students who identify with as a gender neutral individual, we're still giving them education and language to interact with the world. So now in this part of our webinar, I want to show you strategies that I've used in my classes. So as Alex said, I teach at Highline College. And before Highline College, I taught at a refugee resettlement. And before that, I taught at an immersion program. And I have long-term subbed in various other places, but I've taught beginning, intermediate, advanced levels. I've taught as much levels as I think possible, except for business, medical, or academic English. And I've tried different strategies, and some of them have worked and some of them did not work. So I'm, of course, showing you the ones that have worked in my experience. And I'm breaking it down by 3 levels: beginning or beginner, intermediate, and advanced. So with beginner learners, I find it easiest to make this thing stick with simple graphics, and I use the bathroom graphics. And I do not feel it's the most appropriate way to explain the concept, but this is a symbol that many students are aware of. They see this for a male restroom, they see this for a female restroom, and where I live in Seattle and where I lived prior to this, I saw many this, which indicates a gender neutral pronoun or a gender neutral restroom. So students are seeing these on bathrooms, and I'm sure they're wondering, well, which bathroom do I go in if they see this? But I find that the bathroom symbols are a good way to show male, female, and gender neutral, even if I don't think it's the most appropriate way to talk about gender. So as you teach beginner learners, I really encourage using the same graphics as you teach all vocabulary to show that some words in English are gendered and some are not. So I like to teach pronouns when I teach family vocabulary. I find it's a really good way to weave these things together. So when I teach male, I teach female, I teach, gender neutral or between or both. And so I will teach father, mother, parent, son, daughter, child, husband, wife, spouse, boyfriend, girl, partner. And we practice using all of these words. And I have found it's also such a great way to elicit understanding of each word. For example, I will ask a student, how many children do you have? And they will say, I have 5 children. And I say, great. How many daughters? I have 3 daughters. How many sons? I have 2 sons. And I'll also do it backwards. Oh, you have a mother, you have a father. How many parents do you have? So I find that when you teach the gender neutral terms with the gender terms, it really helps elicit understanding of everything. And I have personally never taught these 3 words on the right: nibbling, husband, or I heard ankle or uncle. It was uncle. I have not taught these 3 words because I don't see them in books and I don't hear them enough on the streets to find validity to teach them. But I wanted to mention them in today's discussion just so we know that these terms, they are developing, especially nibbling. Nibbling is something that I'm hearing more and more, especially from colleagues who have children, or I have a colleague who has a nibbling. So it's just something really interesting to be aware of how these terms are growing and being created as we speak. And yeah, I just find it interesting. But like I said, I have yet to teach these three words, especially husband. That is, I feel that's actually more slang. And those who use husband, it's kind of a self identifier. It's not necessarily a categorical term. With beginner learners, I find one of the most important things is to show repetition and integration for everything. So if you're going to teach gender neutral family terms, you should teach gender neutral for as many things that there are. So if you're going to teach policemen, definitely should teach police officer. I'm still quite a little surprised to see how many instructors are still teaching terms like fireman or policeman. It's not common though. Most fellow colleagues are quite good at adapting to the gender neutral, but just be aware of it. They do pop up, all of the gendered, especially for occupational terms. And I know I just said a few slides back that those who use the they, them, their pronoun don't look androgynous, but I have found that showing androgynous looking individuals when teaching the they pronoun has really helped solidify understanding of when it's appropriate to use they, them, their. And this is my opinion. And if you find a little trouble in it, I totally understand that. But when I'm teaching something like hair color or eye color, I always show someone who presents as female and I say she has brown hair or she has brown eyes. And then below that, I'll show them they have brown hair, they have brown eyes, to make the students understand or help them understand that both options are fine. On the other hand, her and he are more often used now, so I just want to show them both options. And here it will be he has green eyes or they have green eyes. And then I'll pop a picture up like this and I will kind of give the students a second to create the sentence. And a lot of times the students are like, I don't know, he or she, but then they go ahead and naturally use they. I've done this now for 3 different classes, and I am really impressed with how well the students just naturally adapt to they. Now, again, not all androgynous individuals use the they, them, their pronoun, and not all they, them, their people look androgynous, but it really helps the beginner learners to know that it's more appropriate to default to the they pronoun if the gender looks, if someone is clearly playing with their gender. So now we're going to move on to examples of how to teach intermediate learners. And to me, intermediate is those who have maybe simple present, simple past, or present continuous knowledge, and those who are really in that part of their language journey where they're learning harder grammar, they're expanding their vocabulary, but they still need a lot of practice with all grammar. That's what my understanding of intermediate is. I'm sure it's very different for all of us. So with intermediate learners, I have to say this has been the hardest level to teach this topic because there's such a high likelihood of unlearning. So by now, intermediate learners know that they is plural. So it is likely you will have to help learners deconstruct and untangle some of the idea of they and how it can be used as plural and singular. And it's now a good time to enforce the idea that they should be automatically used as the pronoun if gender is unknown. So what I'm talking about here is when we are talking about hypothetical situations, like if you're talking about how your doctor checked your knee. Now, many students will refer, oh, your doctor, what did he say? I find that many cultures default to the he pronoun with certain professions or certain situations that are hypothetical, or if you're telling a story. That is why it is so crucial to teach they as a gender neutral pronoun. Even if you're unsure about an in between for the gender binary, it's still so important to teach it as gender neutral for this reason alone. Because gender bias is strong in many cultures, it's still strong in my culture. And this is like a deep rooted bias. And we have the honor to start to untangle this. So, whenever you're talking about the hypothetical situation, how you went to your doctor and they checked out your knee, and students will say, he, what did he say? And I'll always ask, how do you know the gender? And students will be like, uh, uh, because most of the time, these students, they're not meaning to show gender bias. Most of the times, these students know that women can be doctors. It is just a deeply rooted bias that many of us have. It's something that I still have as well when I'm talking about certain professions or hypothetical situations. If we're all honest, we all have this deep inside of us. So when you ask them, how do you know what gender it is? It really gives the opportunity for them to reflect and be like, oh, I don't. And that's when you're like, yeah, use they. And another thing with intermediate learners is if you feel the language allows, explain how language is always changing. I always like to say, everyone, we're in an exciting part of English grammar, something new is developing, and this is what it is. If you feel there's enough language to express this new pivot in English, I think you should address it. And who doesn't love charts? You can always show them some of these charts right here. Now, something I've done with intermediate learners and advanced learners is talk about pronouns and identity. So, of course, first, you want to talk about identity and many things involved in the identity realm, like race, ethnicity, gender, age, nationality, first language, occupation, sexuality, etc. There's so many things to talk about with an identity. And then you want to ask them to prepare something that I call an identity web. So you want to ask them to write their name and their pronouns below. And when you do this, this will create an opportunity to talk about pronouns and why this is something that's going to become more common in many social circles or institutions or jobs or academic settings. And it's definitely important to have or make up examples ready of diverse identities. And if you have to make up somebody who uses a they them pronoun for this activity, do it just to show students in a normalized fashion. Like, here's an example. This is Clara, she, her. This is Rodriguez, he, him. And this is Jesse, they, them. Just a really nice, swift, normalized way to do that. And then, of course, you ask them to think about important aspects of their identity. So I've done this activity at least 5 times, and here's just a couple examples. And it's also a fun first day warm-up activity, or you could create a multi-day, multi-lecture about culture and identity and have them really think about it. And here, this was one I did actually last week. Olivier, he is from Congo, and these are his 5 facets of identity. And I can definitely tell he forgot to include his pronouns because he just wrote them in last minute. But that's okay. I found that pretty comical and also very endearing that he was like, oh no, I forgot this. And then I have another student, Kaz, and you can see all of their identity facets. And so in the future, I'm going to show these examples to let the students know what's possible for what's important to their identity. And for advanced learners, this is, of course, a fun level to teach this topic because we're able to have more of a discussion about it And the discussion's important because their perspective and their questions are very important. Now, remember that we want this, well, maybe not we, but I think it's a good idea to encourage students to ask questions in the classroom because we want them to know that they can ask the questions in the classroom. It's better in the classroom than in the real world. So I try to encourage students, like, if you're just ask all the questions, and that way, if you hurt my feelings or if you hurt someone else's feelings, I have the opportunity to address it. And we're all learning, we're all growing, and many students, most students, they mean well. This is just a really rapidly developing, interesting, topic that many of them have never heard of. So advanced learners, you get a really good opportunity to really talk about it. So cultural exposure, this is a great way to do it. So set them up for an up-to-date English for cultural environment. And with pronouns and with people who aren't on the gender binary, they should be aware of the culture that they may interact with. And again, I know I'm in Seattle, and my mom is quick to say, you're in Seattle and I'm in small town Oklahoma. But I know individuals, it doesn't matter how big, how liberal, how conservative, people who don't live on the gender binary are everywhere. Um, especially in restaurants and as Uber or Lyft drivers, on universities and colleges. And these are spaces that our students either do participate in or will participate in the future. And with the culture, you can connect it to the LGBTQ plus community, but you don't necessarily have to, because sexuality and gender are very different. And like I said, you may have students who ask hard questions or voice confusion. And this is great because you want them to do this in the classroom and not in real life when they are face to face with somebody who uses the they, them, their pronoun. So you want to remain calm and relaxed as you explain that this is a part of the growing US culture. And if I'm talking to anyone in the crowd who does use the they, them, their pronoun, I know it's easier said than done to remain calm. But I find that if you are calm about it and if you react like, yeah, this is normal, then they will replicate it and it will help them understand. And many of you saw that my pronouns are she, they, and it has really given me a lot of opportunity to build validity in this topic as I tell students that I use both pronouns. But I think if I were to have not remained calm and if I were to have not normalized this subject, it would have added more tension than necessary. And most importantly, don't just talk about your culture. It's so easy for us when we talk about identity and culture to talk about ours, but we need to show multiple. So if you show other cultures that see third genders or see gender as a spectrum, again, this will add credibility to what we're talking about. And this is something I'm trying to work on each quarter, is trying to avoid the ethnocentric lens and show them other cultures and perspectives. Again, it's so easy to say, look at my culture, this is how we see it. But we should really try to avoid that and say, look at all of these examples. So with pronouns and culture, explain the different perspective with genders and different cultures. Like I said, I continue to learn more cultures and perspectives on gender as students discuss. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to show you example slides that I used in my most recent class. And these slides are in hope to not be so ethnocentric on my own culture. So most cultures, they recognize gender as a binary. It's often male and female. Often gender is decided at birth by the doctor or the person who delivered the baby, but this is not every culture. Some cultures believe there are multiple genders, and some believe that there are 3 genders. Some believe gender is not physical, but a social belief. So let's look at other perspectives of gender and not just in the US or not just Seattle perspective. So here, one of my favorite things that I've come upon is the study done in Papua New Guinea. Many tribes do see a gender binary, so they do see male or female, but unlike many other cultures, some tribes, not all, they do not determine gender at birth. They determine gender at puberty. And there's a couple different ways this is done, but the one bit of research and article that I read was that sorry, this is supposed to go. They go through a physical test and their sweat is measured by elder members of the community. I don't know what the physical test is, and I don't know if it's who sweats more, who sweats less, but I found that to be very interesting. And something that came to my attention from my Indian friends is that in India, the country recognizes 3 genders, and the third gender is known as hijra. Again, I apologize, I don't speak Urdu. But this is the third gender of India as of April 2014. And the hijra often live in their own community with a guru. So guru is a spiritual leader. So some people in India, they view this as sort of like an outcast community and an unholy community, but other communities in India, they view it as a very normal part of society. So they are given a guru so that their religion or spirituality isn't stripped away from that. And I found that to be really powerful. And other countries near India, like Nepal, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, they also recognize a third gender on their passports, just like India. And it's a very similar term and a very similar social situation. But I'm really happy. One of my Indian friends did tell me that this word can be used as a mean or offensive word. So a lot of people in this community, they prefer to be called this, and I'm so sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it, but I believe my friend said Kuaja Sada. So that's something just to keep in mind if you do one day meet someone in this community. And I wanted just to show that these are some of the countries that include a third gender marker on their passport. And this is quite recent. This is as April 2022. Now, keep in mind, this is just about a passport. Many of these countries here, and I know in South Africa and parts of Northern South America, they do recognize a third gender, but it might not necessarily be on passports or birth certificates yet. I do know that Sweden, Finland, and Norway, they do have the option now on driver's licenses and other forms, but not yet on the passport. And just other interesting facts about language and other cultures of genders is, yeah, it's not starting. It's not starting with us in the United States or those in Nordic Europe. Many other cultures have been aware and fond of third gender or outside the gender binary. Cook Islands, people in Samoa, also Thai individuals, and a broad place in the Arabian Peninsula, and Hawaiian and Tahitian languages. I found this especially to be fascinating, that they found a word for in the middle, and this is a third gender people who fulfill traditional spiritual and social roles for this culture. And it's not just Hawaiian and Tahitian languages and cultures that use the third gender people for spiritual and social roles. It's also the individuals we were just talking about in India. They are also known to do very specific spiritual roles in the community, as well as many indigenous tribes in Canada and the United States, but that was in the past. So there's something a bit holy for many cultures about those who are not on the gender binary. And again, remember that many people on the gender binary are intersex. So intersex meaning they're born with male and female genitalia or parts, or those who are born with XY chromosomes that aren't on the biological binary. So gender is social, it could be physical, and many cultures have been aware of this for a very long time. Another way that we can include pronouns is to teach or talk about prejudice. So a way that you can talk about prejudice is to adapt the layout of the room in a circular manner so that it's not so, hierarchical and everyone looking at one person. And because many students have experience with prejudice and negative stereotypes, this will really give them an opportunity to hear each other and to think more about how viewing people not on the gender binary is prejudice. And again, ethnocentrism is a good definition and a good perspective to start with when we're talking about prejudice. And I'm just going to throw this slide on there. I'm only going to spend about 30 seconds. It's even possible to extend grammar with neopronouns. And these are examples of neopronouns, but this is very, very much developing. And I personally have not taught neopronouns because I really want to normalize the they, them, their pronoun. But it might be fun just to show them what else they may hear in the world. And again, this is why I am so passionate and sure that we should teach the they, them, their pronoun, because in 2019, it was the most used gender neutral pronoun out there. And there are many others, as you can see, and as you saw on this chart, but this is, I don't know, over 75%. So it's worth teaching. So I do have 3 more slides to go. Alex, should I pause here for questions or should I leave the questions for the end?
It's up to you, but I think we should leave the questions for the end.
Okay, well then I am going to continue. I only have 3 more slides left, so we are almost through it. Now, of all that we've talked about and all that I've shown you, I do have things that I really hope all of you remember. The first is that many folks who use they, them, their pronouns don't look androgynous, and that gender is a spectrum. So those who carry these pronouns, they will look diverse. Never assume someone's pronouns. Gender does not equal sexuality. And I wish I had more time and more to hear about what y'all think about questioning gender. It helps everyone, especially women, be free from the impossible standards of gender socialization. It helps especially women from countries of high levels of gender inequality. So what I mean by gender socialization is in the United States, in my small town, men were not expected to cry in public and they were expected to provide. They had all that pressure. And this really has hurt a lot of the men in my life because they feel they can't express or show emotions. And then me as a female, I was expected to get married and start having children by 20. And that put a lot of pressure on me, and it put a huge identity crisis in my life when I was young, because I knew I couldn't fit into that gender norm. And so when we break down the construct of a gender binary, it helps both men and women be free from those impossible standards that we find ourselves in. So what can you do today? I encourage everyone to put your pronouns on your email signature, your WhatsApp, social media bio, Zoom account, syllabus, wherever else is applicable. And I also encourage you to talk about your children, especially your children, because they probably know a lot about this subject. Your spouse, your friends, etc. And I do have many resources that I can provide, and find a way to integrate this in your lessons that makes sense to your student population. I really hope that you found some of what I showed you applicable for your student population or for individuals that you may admin or whatever sector that you're involved in. I just hope that you can find a way to apply it to wherever you are. And again, most important, normalize, normalize, normalize. So normalize the concept of being agender or non-binary in a language, and don't act like those who are not on the gender binary are othered. Students often replicate the attitudes of their teachers. So if you think it's a weird subject, and if you show that it's weird or abnormal, students will pick up on it. But if you just calmly say, yeah, this is changing, and This is a part of our culture. Students, I feel, will be more receptive to this. And again, if students disagree or seem confused, try to explain that this is becoming a normal part in US culture, even if we still have a long way to go. And if all else fails, just focus on the language and less on the culture behind the pivot in the language. I have many references, and I'm happy to share them via email if you're curious. And thank you. And this is my email for anyone who wants resources or questions, or if you found something that worked in your classroom, I'd be very curious. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Elizabeth. We have 2 questions in the chat. The one from Sean Ryan. Have you ever experienced pushback against teaching non-binary gender identity? And if so, how did you handle it?
Yeah, I've more so had confusion, and I've certainly had students say, no, this isn't right. And I feel I've gotten better with it over time. In the beginning, I was really awkward, and I did my best, but I'm human, and in the beginning I wasn't great. But now, because I taught it just 3 weeks ago, and I had that moment where a student raised their hand and said, no, this is not possible. I always thank them for bringing this up, because often many students are thinking that. And I tell them that I understand where they come from. And then I encourage them to think about how our culture sees it like this, and how sometimes your culture and our culture aren't going to align. But I encourage them to be open. And this student in particular is a very, very kind and considerate person. So it was easy for me to say, hey, I know you mean well, and I feel that you want to show respect. So even if you don't agree with it, respect them and try to use the they them there. Because I really truly feel most students, even if there is a lot of pushback, they still really want to respect people. That's how I reacted. And the student was just very much heard me and didn't have a reaction after that.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Let's see. I think this is just a comment from Tony Vernon. I often get confused with they used in the singular, and I sometimes understand plural. Would it not clarify singular/plural is we use singular subject/verb agreement? For instance, they is rather than they are for the singular.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And it was one that I thought, how are we going to explain, they is. And what I do, so the grammar agreement is they are. Even if it's singular, it is still they are. Another instructor encouraged me, and I've used it ever since this advice, to teach it alongside you, to show you are singular, you are plural, and do the same thing with they. And the problem with this that you brought up is there are not a lot of updated grammar charts on this, and many of us, we don't have a lot of time to create new resources. So unfortunately, if you will teach the they singular, you will have to adapt your grammar charts. But my advice is to teach it just as you teach you. So you is singular and plural. And now we shall teach they as singular and plural. I don't know if that answered that question.
I think it did. Oh, and Sean put something in the chat. Non-referring they/you have been addressed in academic writing as well. Oh, and Tony says, yes, it does. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Non-referring.
Okay, let's see. Are there any other questions in the crowd? Oh, Jennifer Roberts says, thank you for this informative and important webinar.
Thanks for coming.
Okay, so Looks like we don't have any other questions. I'm gonna go ahead and close this out. So, oh, thank you. And with that, we must conclude today's online program. Today's presentation was titled Pronouns, Normalizing the Teaching of They, Them, Their, Singular. Special thank you to our presenter, Elizabeth Freeman. This concludes the program. You may disconnect. Thank you, everyone. I'm gonna put a link of Elizabeth's article she just published in the WASL Educator. And it's very informative, and I really recommend that you give it a read. It really goes over everything that she just said in detail. All right, thank you, everyone.